Hello friends, welcome back to Prince Rajesh's free English class. If you are watching the video for the first time, please subscribe the channel and enable the bell button next to it. Today we will have CBSE Class 10, English Chapter 2, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, line by line explanation from First Flight book. Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa. Excerpts from Long Walk to Freedom include a description of the inauguration ceremony, citations from his speech, his journey to being a freedom fighter, the struggle, along with a tribute to other freedom fighters and countless other people who fought for their freedom. Let us see the first paragraph. 10th May, dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. This passage tells us that 10th May was the day when Nelson Mandela sworn in as the first black head of state, South Africa. It was after years of struggle that his anti-racist party came into power. Until then, the seat had always been occupied by white presidents. That is why the author referred to the day as bright and clear. It was a morning full of hope. Days before this date, many notable personalities started congratulating him for his victory. For the first time in the country's history, so many international leaders came together for their inauguration ceremony. Let us see the second passage. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. For decades this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic, non-racial government. This passage tells us that the ceremony took place in an open circular building made of sandstone consisting of Union buildings in Pretoria city. For years it had been under the power of white people, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations to establish South Africa's first democratic, non-racial government. Let us see the next passage. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter, Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the republic and its people. This passage says, the author was accompanied by his daughter, Zenani, on his big day. First, the two vice presidents took an oath. Then, when his turn came, he committed to respect, protect and abide by the Constitution and to devote his entire self into the welfare of the country. Let us see the next passage. To the assembled guests and the watching world, I say, today, all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. We, who were outlaws, not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. This passage says. The author also mentions some parts of his speech, where he said that everyone, by his presence, was giving rise to hope for a new beginning. Previous rulers were discriminatory and lasted for long, but the ones who are given the opportunity to rule now, African National Congress, would stand up against discrimination. He is glad to host a ceremony with the presence of global leaders. It is an achievement in itself. There was a time when South Africa, for practicing apartheid, lost all its international political relationships. Now, when there is no action of setting someone apart from others, on the basis of race and gender, other nations are happy to have healthy democratic relationships. Finally, they have come to power and they pledge to make everyone proud. He thanked everyone, especially the international leaders, for joining them in celebrating their achievement, which is a step towards an equal society where every human will be treated fairly. Let us see the next passage. We have, at last, achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and other discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. This passage says, he mentions that after great struggle, they have finally achieved political freedom. His government promised to free everyone of the still existing poverty, hardship and inequalities of all kind, along with assuring everyone of a country where no community will be considered inferior. He then exclaims that freedom should rule and may God shower His blessings on their land. Let us see the next passage. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters and troop carriers roared in perfect formation over the Union buildings. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful of the fact that, not so many years before, they would not have saluted but arrested me. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. This passage says, just after the newly elected president's address to the audience, an impressive arrangement of fighter jets, helicopter and soldier transporters raised everyone's heads up in the sky. It symbolized perfection as well as military's respect and obedience towards the free country. The high commanders, who have won medals for their bravery, also saluted and promised their loyalty. Mandela mentions that he was well aware that these commanders, who were now saluting him, would have arrested him under the previous rule, as during the oppressive white supremacy, he was considered to be a criminal. The air show finally ended by making of the South African flag in the sky from smoke beneath the jets. Let us see the next passage. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of whites singing Nkosi Sikelel iAfrika and blacks singing Die Stem, the old anthem of the Republic. Although that day, neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. This passage says, the author remembers the day as the playing of two national anthems of the country, one of the whites and the other that of the blacks. On that day, no one knew the wordings of the anthem of the blacks, but Mandela was confident that everyone would soon learn this anthem that they once hated. Let us see the next passage. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century, and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all peoples, regardless of the color of their skin. This passage says, on the day of the inaugural ceremony, the author was remembering the days of past when this whole system of apartheid emerged. It resulted in inequality and inferior treatment of dark-skinned people. They were poor of their basic fundamental rights. As a result, one of the world's most brutal and inhumane society was born. This began even before he was born. This system created an atmosphere of extreme cruelty and injustice for a particular part of the community. Now when he is in his 8th decade as a man, he along with countless others have changed this entire system that treats humans as humans irrespective of their color, caste, gender, or age. Let us see the next passage. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. This passage says, this equal and free country was a result of sacrifices of countless other men and women who have fought all their lives for this day. The author wishes if he could thank them all, but unfortunately, they didn't live to see the result of their courage. Nelson Mandela gathered his courage and power from all these people and thus wishes to make them proud. Let us see the next passage. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another, unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sissulus, the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobaquets of our time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. This passage says, the oppression policy scarred many people and it will take a long time for them to move on. The author mentions that this hard time had its negative impacts, but it also exposed a lot of strong and courageous men who stood up and raised their voice. Thus, it required that level of unjust treatment to produce such great heroes. South Africa, he says, is rich in minerals and gems, but its greatest strength lies in its people. Let us see the next passage. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. This passage says, Nelson Mandela gained his strength to stand against the wrong from all the great nationalists like the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sissulus, the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobaquets of his time, who have even risked their lives for freedom and tolerated ill treatment, but never stopped fighting. He learned that courage didn't mean the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome fear. The man who overcomes his fear is called brave. Let us see the next passage. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. This passage says, one is taught by its society to hate humans because of their skin, color, age, gender and religion. No one is inborn with hatred. The author's idea is that if people can be taught hatred, they can also be taught love and brotherhood. In their most testing times in prison, when they were being treated brutally, Mandela would see a pinch of humanity and kindness in one of the guards, and that was enough to keep him going. He believes that goodness in human beings can be suppressed but never eliminated. Let us see the next passage. In life, every man has twin obligations. Obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children. And he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father and a husband. This passage says, according to the author, every human being has its responsibility towards the family and as well as the society. Generally, under normal circumstances, a person can maintain the balance between the two, but in countries like South Africa, it was never so easy. When a person of color would come up for his society, he would be arrested and taken away from his family, thus keeping them from fulfilling both responsibilities. In the beginning, Mandela did not put his people over his family, but it was only later when he realized that in order to be there for his people, he was compromising his duties towards his own family. Let us see the next passage. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free, free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow-moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. This passage says, the author did not have the plan to stand against the apartheid system early in life. He lived his childhood like any normal child in South Africa. He only had to follow the rules set up by his father or the customs of his tribe. As soon as he grew up and began to learn the facts as to how people of color are treated, he decided to stand against it. He had this urge for freedom from inside, earlier just for himself, staying out at night, etc., and later for having a basic life not just for himself, but for everyone. In Johannesburg, they had to struggle for having a peaceful marriage, family and basic amenities which everyone has access to where law and order exists. Let us see the next passage. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. That is when I joined the African National Congress. And that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home, that forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. This passage says that Nelson Mandela joined the African National Congress, ANC, when he realized it is not only him whose basic rights were snatched away, but of all those who looked like him. He had this fire inside him to free his people from the injustice. It was this fire that changed the author completely as a man, from being scared to brave, a lawyer to the one breaking the law, a family man to a man without a home, and a lively man into being a monk. It was the knowledge that he and his people have restricted freedom that made him into a selfless man as opposed to before. According to him, freedom cannot be divided. Snatching it away from some was equivalent to taking it away from everyone, and that meant taking it away from the author. Let us see the next passage. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. In this passage, he mentions that the need to free the oppressor is as high as that of the oppressed, because the oppressor is bounded by the handcuffs of hatred. He has the weight of all the people who he has tortured, for he carries the curses of all of their families. For taking away someone else's freedom and making them a prisoner, he becomes a prisoner of business. Thus, he is robbed of his humanity and need to be freed. I hope you understood the lesson. I'll be back with a new lesson. Thank you so much for watching.